Welcome to the fourth tutorial in my Capture One series, in which I teach you Capture One in short, easy to digest chunks. So far we did a quick episode which was a tour of the program in general. I then showed you the library tab and we did a scenario where you'd be shooting multiple looks, perhaps for a model or a product in a single day, and how you might organize your files, use smart albums and things to make things nice and easy for you. We then covered the Capture tab. That's all about capturing images, how you're applying adjustments to all your images as you go. And I also showed you one of my favorite techniques, which was to use live view. If you missed any of those videos, they're all going to be linked down below in the description, so make sure you check them out. Today, we're going to finally get into some of the more detailed parts of Capture One, some of the more interesting things, and that is the adjustment tabs. I could spend a very long time taking you through every single setting inside of Capture One, but that would make this video 2 or 3 hours long, and I doubt that most of you are going to want to watch that. So instead, I'm going to assume you have a little bit of knowledge about this stuff, and I'm going to gloss over some sections and just show you some of the more interesting features inside of Capture One. Before we get going with all of the adjustment tabs over here, I'm just going to quickly take you through the toolbar, which occupies the top part of the screen inside Capture One. Most of this is pretty obvious, so we're going to go quite quickly. As with every other area inside Capture One, this section can be customized. So see, if I right click here and go to customize, we can move things around, drag in extra items. The only two items that I like to have, which aren't there already, are show overlay and then also show focus mask. So let me just get those in there and then we can go through. This is just copy and paste. So you select an image, copy this, and then you can select another image and paste. Easy. These are rotate. Pretty self-explanatory. You don't need me to go through those. This toggles between whether you're editing only the primary image that you have selected or all of them. So if I selected all of these images here, the one with the harder outline is the primary image. So at the moment, that's the primary image. If I select this one, this is now the primary image. If I have this selected or not, what it means is, say if I was processing all of these images, then if this was not selected, it would only process that image. If it was selected, it would process all of them. Same for if you're copying and pasting. So if I turned that off and I clicked copy for this image and then paste down here, it would only do it onto there. Whereas if that was on, it would do it onto all of the images. Pretty easy. It's a little bit confusing maybe to begin with, but if you just experiment with it, you'll get the idea. Overlay we covered in a previous video, so I'm not going to cover that now. Check it out in the description if you want to have a look at that. This just toggles it on and off. Show focus mask is quite cool, especially if you're doing, oh, well, there it is already. It's already loaded up. So we have the overlay here. It's an image. This is a PNG, and you can just turn it on and off. This is show focus mask, which is really useful if you're doing things like shooting models. Essentially, it just turns every area that's in focus green. So if you're shooting models and you don't want to have to zoom in all the time and check the focus and be like, oh, is the eye in focus or whatever, you can just have this on and then you'll know. So that's really useful. This is for proofing. So if you're trying to check for, what it does is it proofs your recipe. So you can check the ICC profile and other settings that you've applied. This is a exposure warning. So as you can see, if I turn this on and off, check out the boat down here. You see how it turns blue? That means that it's clipping the blacks in this area. So if I go into edit and preferences, and we go over to exposure here, then we have the two options here. So we have a highlight warning and a shadow warning. The highlight warning will be red. At the minute, there's only this little section over here in this image, which is red, but you can adjust how much you want the warning to come in. So if I take this down, at the minute, anything over 250 will show up a warning, and anything below 5 will show up a warning on the shadow side. So if I take this down, then you'll see more things, that the sky starts to come in, and the same with the black area. So that's nice and simple, nice and easy. Keyboard shortcut for turn that on and off is Control E. Then we have guides, so you can toggle this on and off. At the minute, I've hidden some of them, but if you double click on one of these, then takes you straight to the menu, just like I went to edit and preferences. Then it's the same place, but now we're just in crop. So you have a grid. So if I just turn this on, that's kind of the standard state. You'll see it in most of the time, and you can just toggle it on and off here. You can then go into this area and make adjustments. So you can change the color of the lines, you can change the number of lines that there are. You can change the color of the guides. So these are like guides, manual ones that you would add. On my 4K screen, they look really thin, so hopefully you can see these okay. But yeah, so if you go view, you can add other ones. So you can add more vertical or horizontal guides if you want and just drag them to wherever you want. This is annotations. I'm going to cover that at a later stage when we get over to the metadata tab over here. This is a relatively new feature. It's really cool. We'll cover that in a bit though. Here we have your cursor tool. So whenever you click on one of these, your actual cursor, which at the moment, you see it's the hand, you see the hand here, your actual cursor will change. This one is for annotations. This is for copying and pasting. This, I think, yeah, that's the white balance tool. There's also a really cool one here that I love to use, which is called Add Color Readout. If you long click on any of these, it'll bring up a menu and you can choose other cursor tools you can use. Add Color Readout. If I click this anywhere on the image, then it'll tell me the RGB readout for that section. Doesn't sound that interesting, might not sound that useful to you. For me, with my product photography, it is amazingly useful and I love it. Here we have a brush, which also has a razor mask and gradient mask in there. We have spot tool. This is for keystoning, which I'm going to cover in a minute. Straighten tool. You can also rotate with this as well. We have cropping loop tool, which is very cool. This allows you to zoom in on particular areas of an image without actually having to zoom in, which is quite nice. Then we have a hand tool, which is good for zooming in. Double click and you can zoom in and then click and drag around your image. And then we have the arrow tool. I tend to stay on the hand tool most of the time. Over this side, we have an automatic adjustment button. Click that and Capture One will make some automatic adjustments for you. I don't tend to use it too much, but you might like that. Then you have an undo and a redo button, a reset everything, move to trash, move to selects folder, capture an image and import. The import tab, if you want to import any images that you have already got on your computer, you can do that from here. It's pretty easy, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. As you guys know, I tend to use Capture One as more of a tethering platform. So I'm shooting with it throughout the whole day and images are being imported into it. So I don't really use the import tab over here all that much. Okay, let's get going with our first adjustment tab then. So that is the lens tab. Most of this stuff is pretty obvious, so we're going to fly through this one. Lens corrections. Diffraction correction is quite a new thing. If you're shooting at anything where any aperture where diffraction might come into play, you can tick on diffraction correction, and Capture One has a little algorithm, I guess you'd call it, that they run, and it just sharpens up areas that would be softened due to diffraction. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Then we have sharpness fall off and light fall off. As you can see, Capture One knows the lens that I'm shooting with and it automatically has a profile for it. So I was using the Sony 16-35. You can see down here I was shooting at f4, so diffraction wasn't really coming into play. And I was at 16mm. So Capture One automatically, because I was at 16mm, because I was so wide, it automatically, see how it's cropped in here? You see this area outside of my image? That doesn't exist on this photo here. When you're in the crop tool, it automatically shows you your crop. So you can see Capture One has cropped in here. That's because it's automatically made a distortion adjustment. And that would have been because I was shooting so wide at 16mm. Then we have sharpness fall off and light fall off. This will be specific to the lens you're using. So again, these are just kind of correction adjustments which Capture One can make. Purple fringing, again, another correction adjustment. LCC. LCC is a bit of a weird one. So what it requires is like a plate that you hold in front of your camera, and then Capture One, you take a photo and then Capture One analyzes that photo, looks where the dust is on your sensor, and then will automatically remove that and any color cast that you have from your lens. So pretty cool. I've never used it, but it sounds quite cool. Rotational Flip is very obvious. It mirrors these settings here for left and right. You also have this tool here which can help you with horizons. So if I was like here on this image, excuse it being a little bit overblown, and we wanted to straighten the horizon a little bit, you click, drag, and then click on the other edge that you want to straighten, and there we go, it automatically straightens it. You also have this bit which is quite cool. This is called flipping. So you can flip like you would do in Photoshop. You could flip horizontally and completely change the direction of the image, and you could do it vertically as well. So that's quite cool. Here we have our crop. You can add crop aspect ratios here, add ones yourself. These are like the stock ones. And now keystoning. Oh, actually no, before I get onto that, crop outside image. This is really cool. So if you needed to, for some reason, I have it happen to me all the time, that I actually want to crop outside the area for whatever reason there might be. If you do need to do that, you click crop outside image area and you'll be able to do so. There is a limit to how far you'll be able to go, but you can go a little bit and that can be really helpful. So keystoning, this, you'll typically see it being used for architecture. Architectural photographers often use lenses like tilt shift lenses or even view cameras, so that when they're looking up at a building, rather than the lines going all funny like they have done in this image, and I'll show you in a second, they can straighten that in camera using either the view camera or the tilt shift lens. I don't have one of those, many people don't. And if you're traveling around, say on holiday, like when I took this photo, you're probably not going to be carrying a view camera around with you. So you can have adjustments that you can make inside Capture One to straighten those lines on buildings. So let me show you now. So as you can see here, this line should be straight. I'm shooting at 18mm and the camera wouldn't have been completely level. So you can see it's a little bit off. It's much more obvious in this photo. We can see that's really, really leaning back. But I'll just do the correction here. So keystoning, you can do it either horizontally or vertically or both. In this instance, I'm just going to do it horizontally. And what you do is you select these parts and you go to an area in the image that that should be straight. Somewhere there should be a straight line. If you hit H for the hand tool, you can zoom in again. Hit K for the keystone tool, and then you can move these. If you select them, you can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard to make really fine adjustments, but I'm just going to do this very quickly now with my mouse. Zoom out, hit K again, and find another edge on the opposite side that should also be straight, so also roughly over here. If you want to do a good job of this, you shouldn't be rough, but I'm just trying to be quick. Once you've got it in place, you hit apply, and you'll see a change will happen, and there we go. Those lines are now straight. So I'll just show you a quick before and after, and doing so demonstrates something else. So if I right click on this and go new variant, what that does is it copies our image, creates a new version of it, but it hasn't applied any of the settings that I have done on this image. So you see this is like a before and after. This is before and this is after. You see all the buildings being straightened. If I wanted to create a copy which did have everything on here, then you would go to clone variant. And that's the difference between the two. So this one you see is a clone variant, this was the new variant. Now let's get rid of those by hitting delete and just go back to where we were. Our next tab is the color tab. So if we click on here, the first thing we have in here is a histogram. Most of you should be familiar with that. One of the most interesting features inside Capture One we're getting to now, and that is layers. A lot of you are going to be familiar with layers from Photoshop. If you use Photoshop, you're going to know exactly what this is. Inside of Lightroom, there is not, as far as I'm aware, unless they've changed things, they don't have this functionality. What a layer does is it allows you to have your image on the bottom, and then you can add layers above it, which you can apply adjustments to. So rather than applying adjustments to your layer, you can to your base layer, to your image layer, you can add extra layers and then add adjustments to those. You can then mask those layers and make very, very specific adjustments to targeted areas of your image, or you can make global adjustments, but you can stack them. So you could have multiple curves, you could have multiple anything and then mask them in different areas. You could mask a curve in someone's eye or do dodging and burning on a layer or whatever you wanted. There's so many possibilities for doing this, and it makes Capture One really powerful. The standard way to create a new layer would be to click here, and as you can see a layer gets created. You can double click on it, rename it to whatever you want, and then make an adjustment. In our case, I'm just going to do, a very, very quick darkening of the sky, for instance. Now, once you create a layer, you'll see, notice next to white balance when I change this here, you see that little brush appears? That means that the adjustment can be made as a layer. Not everything can be, for instance, normalize and black and white can't be, but most things can. So for the moment, I'm going to the next tab, this is the exposure tab, and I'm just going to darken the sky by, I'm going to darken the sky by a stop. Now you see nothing happened there, and that's because I haven't drawn a mask yet. what we've got here is a layer with no mask, so there's nothing being applied to our image. So I'm going to grab the gradient mask. That's this one here. You can hit G if you want for a shortcut for it. I'm going to click, hold shift and drag that down. And what we'll see is the sky darkens. If I hit M, that shows us our mask. And if I wanted to, I could hit E, which gives me the eraser tool, which you can see up here. Right click, I can change the size of this, the hardness of it, take the flow down a little bit so it's not applying 100% immediately, and just take this a little bit off some of the take it off some of the mountains up here because I don't want them to darken quite so much, and then I could apply more of it there. And there we go. It's a very quick darkening. It's too heavy, but you get the idea. And you can apply tons of things to this. It could be colors, it could be curves, it could be anything. There's so much that you can do with this. So let's delete that and go back to our background layer. Oh, actually, I'll tell you what, one other quick thing. Up here, this is also another quick way for you to be able to switch between layers. So you see we have both layers there. If you have multiple ones, then it's important to make sure you're on the right layer if you're making adjustments. For instance, if I want to make adjustments now, globally, I should be back on the background layer. So let's just delete this now, and we'll carry on. The next section we'll be covering is the exposure part, and most of this is pretty obvious, so I'm going to gloss over that. But I think saturation is worth spending a second on because it does act a little bit differently to what you might be used to in other applications. It acts a bit more similarly to vibrance, so you can go a bit further with it. You don't want to be too heavy-handed, but you can definitely do more with it than you would do with saturation in other programs. High dynamic range is pretty obvious. If you've got anything clipping out, so if I get Control or Command E to see my shadow and highlight warnings, if you've got anything clipping out on either side, then you can use these to bring them back. You don't want to go too heavy on these because you can make a very ugly image very quickly. That is horrendous. Don't anyone ever convince you that that looks nice. It's horrible, and you used to see this all the time. Thankfully, not so much anymore. If you ever want to reset your settings on something, you can just hit that button, and you also have a little auto thing here. So like with this auto settings up here, you can hit A and Capture One will automatically make some adjustments. It didn't think anything needed doing there. Here, it thought it needed a bit of brightening. Yeah, you can do that on next to each one, which is quite cool. Okay, moving on, we have levels. I think most of you are going to understand what that does. Curves, again, you're all going to understand that, I imagine. But there is one thing which is interesting with Capture One, is it has two different types of curves. We have an RGB and a Luma curve. So if we continue working with this image and I just create a new clone variant, so we have the settings copied across, and I do an RGB curve. So we'll do a relatively heavy curve. This probably won't look very nice. We'll turn off our exposure warning, and then I'm gonna do roughly the same curve. Let's just have a look at that again. Okay, let's do roughly the same curve for Luma. Doesn't have to be exact, but it's gonna give you an idea. So if I toggle between these two photos, you notice there's quite a big difference in saturation. If you look up here, especially at the mountains, you can really see that on this version, where I did the RGB curve, they're much more saturated than they are here. And that's because this curve, the Luma curve, acts differently. It does not affect your color as much. It's affecting more of the luminosity in the image, whereas the standard RGB curve is affecting more of the colors, and therefore you're getting a shift in color when you might only want to change luminosity. I normally just use a luminosity curve, and then I'll be dialing in my saturation in other areas. I don't really like having the RGB curve also take care of saturation when I can actually dial that in manually myself. It's a much better way, in my opinion, of doing it. So let's just get rid of this one again. I'll tell you what, we'll just hit delete on the keyboard to delete that. And let's move to the next section. Clarity. You're probably going to be familiar with this again from other programs. Let me just reset this back to nothing. There we go. You're probably going to be familiar with this from other programs, but I'll just quickly explain here because there are a couple other things that you might not be aware of. So they have a few different methods for clarity. Really, you're just going to have to experiment with these to see which one works best for you. Natural is the default, and that is my preferred way of doing it. So if we just max this out, it's not going to look very nice. Or I tell you what, let's put it on 50. Let's not make it look too horrible. So if I put it to 50, you can see if I just toggle this on and off, that it does make a pretty significant difference to our image, especially in some of the details. But if I go through these, each one will do a different thing. It affects colors and mid-tone contrast in a slightly different way. So just experiment with which one you like best. We also have structure. Clarity was explained to me by imagining a tree. If you have a picture of a tree, then the trunk and the branches are being taken care of by clarity. They're affecting the contrast for those areas, whereas structure will be doing the leaves. So structure does all of those really, really fine little details in an image. You've got to be quite cautious here because you can end up introducing noise and some nasty kind of crunchy artifacts if you go too far with it. So let me just show you here. If I crank this up, you can see it really, I mean, you really start to see these details in the mountain, but obviously it's made the image look a little bit too crazy for me. You're getting some things that don't look too great, but it's fantastic if used correctly. So if we were only to say use 20 and 20 of each, quite a subtle adjustment, nothing too crazy. We're still getting a lot more details up here. It doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty good actually. That's the original and that's the new version. You can see tons and tons of detail. So just be cautious with those. Vignetting, most of you are going to know that, so I'm skipping past that. I've just realized that I completely skipped out a section, so we're going to go back one to color. In color, we have the histogram again, just like we do at the top of exposure, and we also have the layers tab. So we have that at the top of both ones. Base characteristics is just going to be your standard ICC profile, which Phase 1 does for most camera bodies. The latest ones it won't necessarily have, but it does tend to get them in there pretty quickly. Your curve, this is an interesting one. I know some people I've spoken like to use linear response curves because you're a really flat curve and then you can work from there. Personally, I like to just go from auto and work from there. It's not really a massive difference. Obviously, well, there is a massive difference, but I think you can actually get the same edit from both, and I like having a rough approximation of what I'm getting while I'm shooting, because if you're shooting in linear, then I just feel like you're not really seeing exactly what you necessarily want. It's quite a difficult way to work, so I tend to leave it on auto. White balance is obvious. You're all going to know white balance, I hope. Next we have the Normalize tool, and for me as a still life and product photographer, I don't really tend to use this all that much. I had to dig into my archives to find some images that I could use this on, and I've managed to find this old family photo shoot that I did years ago. So what Normalize will allow you to do is you can click anywhere in an image and then it'll analyze the white balance and exposure for that section. So you see this little tab here, this little square, which shows you the numerical values for what I'm clicking on here. So the green or the yellow or this top here or the blue in that top. I think a lot of people use it for skin tones. So I could click on the skin tone here and say that I want that matched in another image. So you then select this tool, which would apply that, and I click in roughly the same place on her skin tone, and you see how the white balance and the exposure changed there to match what we have in this image. It's not perfect, but it's done a pretty good job. I'd say it's a little bit too blue, but it's not bad. There are lots of other uses for it. I've seen people using it in creative ways. You could also use it, for instance, here in a still life shoot that I did, where I want the background here to match. So as you can see, it changes a little bit in color and luminosity. Let's use the tool here to copy that section, and if you hold Alt, you don't have to select this one. You see how the cursor automatically changes there. If you hold Alt, and I have the apply one, and I apply that there, and you can see that did a really quite a good job of matching that. Still a little bit off. I probably didn't click in the right place, but this is a really powerful and really useful tool for a lot of people. For me personally, it's not, but it might be really useful for you. Then we have the color balance tool. This is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through it too much. We have a master one where we can adjust the color overall for the entire shadows, midtones, and highlights at the same time. We then have a three-way one where we have the shadows, midtones, and highlights, or we can see them individually like this. So if we see them individually, let's say I want to pump some blues into the shadow like that. This controls the saturation. So for the color that I selected, you see how it's moving here along the saturation of the wheel. So that's more saturated and less saturated, and that would control the luminosity of that section as well. And then I first say I wanted to add some yellows in the highlights. Very typical kind of fashion-y sort of look. Take the saturation down on that a bit. And there we go, very, very quick adjustment. There's loads and loads you can do with this. This is just quickly showing it to you. Then we have black and white adjustments. Click that to enable it. You can change all your black and white settings there. You can do split tones as well. And then we have the color editor. Now this one I'm going to spend a little bit longer on because it's extremely cool and I think you would want to see how it's used. So where's the shot I wanted to use for this one? I tell you what, we can use this for a minute. So if we go back to the color editor, let's say I wanted to select a specific color in this image. I might have taken a product shot of something and I want to change the color to something else, or I might just want to edit a specific color. So let's say I want to select the red of this rooftop here. We take our color picker tool, click on the rooftop, and you see it selects a certain part of the color wheel, which I've just clicked there. So if I like to oversaturate this and it really shows me what I've selected. You can also use view selected color range. That turns everything else to grayscale except the selection that you've made. Personally, I prefer just oversaturating it. That's going to be up to you which you prefer. Now, as I move this around, you'll see that it selects other colors. And I'll just Apple Z that, and it goes back to the color that we selected there. Now we can then change our hue for that. So I can make our rooftops more purple if I do this a couple times. If we wanted to have purple or blue rooftops in Croatia, and we can adjust the saturation of them, we can adjust the lightness. Now this is really, really powerful if you're doing, like I said, if you're adjusting products, or if you want to really just adjust the colors in an image in general. You can make some really fine and really refined adjustments using this tool. The smoothness adjustment here, if you check out this area, check out this as I move smoothness. The higher I go on smoothness, the more that feathers out, and that just means I'm selecting more of the surrounding colors. So this would be a very fast, sharp fall off of colors that I've selected, and that would be a nice feather. It's good to have it roughly near the default. You don't want to have too sharp of an adjustment, otherwise you might see the edge of what you're doing. So let's just get rid of this and move over to the skin tone aspect of this. Now this is also pretty amazing, but sadly not something that I have to use all that much as a product and still life photographer. A lot of portrait photographers do use this though. You can select an area of a skin tone. So say we like that area there. You see it comes up on the color wheel of what we selected. We can then adjust the hue, saturation and lightness of what we've selected. And we can also make it more uniform across the whole face. So I will do something now, it'll probably look terrible. Yeah, so you see that takes the skin tones more toward green. This is more toward red. I don't actually mind where they are there at the moment. We could saturate them a tad. I probably think they're a little bit too bright, a little bit too overexposed. We could darken that just a tiny bit. And then we could adjust the uniformity. See how she's got quite a lot of red in her cheeks and on her hand here? If I take this all the way up, then you see, ignore the background, but you can see how the face becomes really uniform. Now, obviously you would not want to go to maximum, and it's actually quite nice for someone to have some differences in color in their face, especially red in a child's face, it shows emotion. But you know, using a little bit of this, you can adjust that if you want, and for models or for other purposes, this could be extremely, extremely useful. Our next tab is the Details tab. This one, I don't think there's very much I need to explain here. I think you are all going to understand most of this stuff. We have a navigator, which will show us where we are in our image. So if I just hit H and zoom in, you see it gives us a little representation here. We can move around there. We also have the focus window, which is nice. A lot of people often float this out. And then as you're photographing, let's say a model or something, you can just be checking the focus on their face. That might be on a second monitor or something. That's quite nice to use. And then we have the actual sharpening controls over here, noise reduction, film grain, moire, and spot removal. For a lot of our adjustment tools, we have what's called presets, which is what I'm going to move to in a second, but I can just show you here. So these 3 lines denote presets. If I click on that, you can see there's a certain number of presets for sharpening. So we have an automatic soft sharpening preset. That's quite a heavy preset if you've if you really haven't focused quite well and you really need to sharpen it up, and you have different ones here. So quite a few tools have these presets. You have one for moire and film grain and noise reduction, and you can also save your own presets. So let's move on to the next section, which is all about styles and presets. The difference between styles and presets is that presets are just for one individual tool, like how I was showing you there with sharpening, or you might have some presets for curves, with just a few preset curves that you use and they're very often dialed in. Styles are where you've added an entire kind of global style for lots of different adjustments. So you might be more familiar with them inside of Lightroom, for example, where they'd be called develop presets. In Capture One, they're called styles. So you might have a style that has a whole bunch of adjustments made to it. You click it and it adds all of them to your image at the same time. I'll show you. So here we have the adjustments tab inside the adjustment tabs. And let's show you a few things. So we have some built-in styles. This is what I was saying, where they are applying lots of different effects. So let's say this first one here, Spring 1, that kind of gives you quite an autumnal sort of feel. The only thing I don't like about this is that it's actually applying it onto her skin and onto her, which I don't really like that too much. So if I just untick that, you see as you roll through them, it gives you a preview on the image of it, and as you click it, you see it ticked, and then that's on there. So if I untick that, but then I right click on it and go apply to new layer, that creates a new layer with this attached to it. So we can see it's got a new layer created with the name SPR-01, which is the same as that. And we still have our background layer. So if I go onto this, we can see if I hit M that it's applied it everywhere. But if I hit E so that I can erase it from certain areas, then I could erase it off of her where I didn't really like it. I'm just doing a very, very rough job, but it just gives you an idea. So now we can see if I go back over to one of our layers and I toggle this on and off, then we can see it's now only affecting our background, not affecting our subject in this case. Going back over to the adjustment tabs, we can see, so Lightroom, Capture One has some built-in styles here. We have Legacy and Spring, they come with the program. You can also buy plenty of other ones. It's not something that I tend to use all that much, but it would be very, very useful if you have a high volume workflow, loads of images like a wedding photographer or a portrait photographer or something. And then we also have all the built-in presets. So these are the ones, like I was saying before, we had all the sharpening ones that I just showed you. You can save your own presets and you can save your own styles by going to the 3 little lines just next to a tool. If you went to those 3 little lines, and you could save your own preset, or if you wanted to save your own style, then you just come up to the top here, styles and presets, click this line, hit save user style, and then you can select the adjustments that you've made and save that as a style and name it. The other section of the adjustments tab that's worth noting is the adjustments clipboard. When you're copying and pasting things, you can actually choose what adjustments you want to copy and paste. So if I hit copy here, then we'll see all of these adjustments light up, and we see everything that I have adjusted in this image is now ticked on here, and I've now copied that. But let's say for some reason I didn't want to copy layers. I didn't want to copy this layer adjustment that I just showed you and made. So now I've unticked that, and let's navigate to another image. Doesn't really matter what. And I hit the apply button, and it applies all those adjustments, but it ignores the layer one that I just did. So let's undo that. And we're going to dock this back where it's supposed to go. Moving over to our final tab, that's the metadata tab. I'm going to gloss over most of this because I don't think you guys need me to explain what metadata is. If you do need to find any of it out, it's all here. You can search for keywords and add keywords here. I explain how to do that in the library tab video. But I am going to cover the annotations tool. This is relatively new to Capture One, and what it allows you to do is draw onto your image and add annotations. So let's just say, bear in mind I'm using a mouse here, so this will look really bad. And I can't even write. Oh, that was supposed to be changed. Well, anyway, if you imagine that says change and it's pointing here, and I don't know, let's say you just got a bunch of adjustments that you want to make, you want a retoucher to make, and you've highlighted certain things like, oh, can you change that, change the color of the shoes, change this, and you highlight a bunch of stuff, you make a load of notes. What you can do is you can actually export this as a layer inside of Photoshop. So I'm not going to be covering the output and the Q tab in this video. I'm going to make a separate one for that, but I am just going to quickly show you what happens when you export this. So if I go File, we'll do it as a PSD, 8-bit, whatever, yeah, that's all fine. We want it to open with Photoshop, and the important bit is with the metadata, I want annotations as a layer. So if I hit Control or Command D to process that, you see the little cog comes up. Photoshop is going to open up in a second. Once this is finished processing, you'll see that going across there. My laptop might be doing a few other things at the same time here, so I think recording video does tend to take up quite a lot of power, recording 4K. So there we go. We can see it's opened up inside Photoshop and it's opened up as a layer. So hopefully, if you're using a Wacom tablet, you can write a little bit better than that, and you can actually make something that's kind of useful for a retoucher or an art director or whoever's actually using it. Thanks for watching today, guys. I hope you got a lot out of this video. If you have any questions about today's video, about Capture One or photography in general, chuck them in the comments and I'll be happy to answer. If you liked the video, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. And if you want to see more from me on Capture One and photography, make sure you subscribe. All right, thanks guys. I'll catch you later.